Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we're comparing the new Radeon RX 6600 XT head-to-head with the GeForce RTX 3060 in 30 games. This will give us a really good idea of how these two GPUs compare, and it'll also give me a second chance to sort of re-review the 6600 XT using 3-week-old pricing, which is kind of nice given that the day one review was created about a week before the 6600 XT was set to hit shelves, so pricing and availability were largely unknown. Speaking with retailers, it did sound as though supply was going to be quite a bit better, certainly a lot better than any previous current generation releases, and therefore pricing would also be a lot better. Based on the typical markup we were seeing for the 6700 XT models over at ebay.com, I expected that the 6600 XT would cost around $570 US, and 3 weeks later, the real figure is pretty close to that at $605 US. At the time, the typical sale price of the RTX 3060 was $720 US, and today that figure remains unchanged. So eBay pricing for the 6600 XT is a little worse than I estimated back in my day one review, but it is still far better value than the RTX 3060, at least based on the performance data featured in our day one review. For today's video, we'll be able to take real-world pricing data and compare it across a much larger 30-game sample to see which GPU really does offer gamers the most value. I'll also take a look at ray tracing performance in the new F1 2021 game, along with Metro Exodus Enhanced, which is a follow-on from the Cyberpunk 2077, Doom Eternal, Resident Evil Village, and Watch Dogs Legion results, which were featured in the original review. Now, for this testing, I used our AMD Ryzen 9 5950X test system with 32GB of DDR4 3200CL14 dual-rank dual-channel memory. Both GPUs were tested at 1080p, 1440p and 4K, though I won't discuss the 4K data, it's just been added for those of you who are interested in the numbers. Of the 30 games tested, we're only going to take a close look at the results for a dozen of them, and then we'll take a quick look at how these two GPUs compare head-to-head across all of the games with a single graph. Finally, please note all graphs will be made available to Floatplane and Patreon members. Okay, let's get into it. Starting with Borderlands 3, we have a rare example of an Unreal Engine 4 game that runs exceptionally well with Radeon GPUs. Here the 6600 XT was a massive 28% faster at 1080p, delivering 92 FPS on average using the ultra quality settings, which is actually the second highest quality preset in the game. The 6600 XT was also good for 65 FPS on average at 1440p, and that meant it was still 27% faster than the RTX 3060, so an easy win here for AMD. Next up we have Total War Warhammer II, and here the 6600 XT is actually slightly slower than the RTX 3060. In fact, it's quite a bit slower at 1440p, where the GeForce GPU enjoyed a 15% performance advantage. But for those of you gaming at 1080p, the RTX 3060 was just 6% faster, but still not a great title for the 6600 XT. The Radeon GPU does jump back out in front when testing with Stranding, though it has to be said both GPUs delivered excellent performance using the highest in-game quality preset. Although the Radeon GPU was 20% faster at 1080p, the RTX 3060 was still good for 132 FPS on average. The margin was slightly reduced at 1440p to 18% in favour of the 6600 XT, but even so, the GeForce GPU was still good for almost 100 FPS on average. But this was a great title for AMD. The 6600 XT also blasts ahead in Forza Horizon 4, delivering 17% greater performance at 1080p with an incredible 180 FPS. The margin was again ever so slightly reduced at 1440p, as here the Radeon GPU was now 15% faster, averaging 143 FPS. Days Gone, like Warhammer, is another example where the 6600 XT ends up trailing the RTX 3060, and although the margin isn't huge, we saw very few examples of this in the day one review. Here we're looking at 5% less performance for the Radeon GPU at 1080p, and then 8% less at 1440p. F1 2021 is the latest title to be added to our huge list of games that we benchmark with, and this one enables ray tracing by default on supported hardware when using the ultra quality preset. So that being the case, I have left it enabled. The 6600 XT does surprisingly well relative to the RTX 3060, as both GPUs delivered comparable performance at all three tested resolutions. Metro Exodus Enhanced requires hardware accelerated ray tracing support, and without it you'll have to play the original version of the game, which frankly really isn't a big deal, but since both of these GPUs support ray tracing, it makes sense to benchmark with the enhanced version. Again, performance is fairly similar at all three tested resolutions. The RTX 3060 was just 4% faster at 1080p, and then we saw identical performance at 1440p. Next up, we have Red Dead Redemption 2, and for this one I'm using the high quality settings, which have to be set manually as the game doesn't have any fixed presets, which is super annoying. Anyway, at 1080p, the 6600 XT was 9% faster than the RTX 3060, so a decent little win there, but at 1440p performance is much the same, and then exactly the same at 4K. Counter-Strike Global Offensive is really a CPU benchmark at this point, with any half-decent GPU resulting in heavily CPU-bound testing, but this one's always hotly requested by viewers, so I feel somewhat compelled to include it, and I don't mind doing so when there are so many other games to balance out the results. As expected though, we're looking at similar performance between these two GPUs at all three tested resolutions. Performance in Apex Legends is also very competitive, but this title isn't CPU limited, at least not with these GPUs using the maximum in-game quality settings. Both GPUs allowed for solid 144Hz gaming at 1080p, and even at 1440p you're still looking at a high refresh rate experience. The second last game we're going to look at is Outriders, and here we're again looking at very similar performance using either GPU. The 6600 XT was a smidgen faster at 1080p, while we're looking at identical performance at 1440p, so overall much the same here. Using our updated Cyberpunk 2077 benchmark pass, we also find very competitive results in this highly demanding title. Please note ray tracing has not been enabled, and we're also not using the highest quality preset, instead settling for the second highest option. In my day one review of the Radeon RX 6600 XT, the new AMD GPU was found to be 10% faster than the RTX 3060 at 1080p, and just 5% faster at 1440p. So it's going to be very interesting to see how those margins compare to what we find when testing with 30 games, so let's go find out. Starting at 1080p, we see that the margin has come down from 10% in favour of the Radeon GPU to just 6%. Not a massive change, but it is certainly less favourable for AMD. The decline is largely due to the inclusion of titles such as PUBG, Days Gone, Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, Warhammer 2, Biomutant, and F1 2021, which did replace a much more favourable F1 2020 result. Then at 1440p, the margin dropped from 5% seen in the original 6600 XT review to just 3% across the 30-game sample, so basically a tie here, though the 6600 XT was still a little more consistent overall with big wins in Valorant, Borderlands 3, World War Z, Death Stranding, and Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Okay, so the Radeon RX 6600 XT is the faster GPU overall, which we already knew, though the margin is even smaller than first thought. Though of course, that really depends on the games used for testing, or I suppose from your perspective, the games you actually care about. As for stuff like ray tracing performance, seems fairly even, though I'd say the RTX 3060 has better support overall, at least right now. The RTX 3060 also benefits from DLSS support, which is still more widespread than FSR, and in our opinion works much better at lower resolutions such as 1080p. The NVIDIA encoder, often referred to as NVENC, is also commonly pushed as a big plus for GeForce graphics cards, but I've found very little difference between Shadowplay and Relive for capturing gameplay. AMD's solution now appears to work very well, and the quality is excellent, so I'm not sure how much of an advantage NVENC really is these days. Of course, what really matters in today's market is pricing and availability, and it's here where the Radeon RX 6600 XT appears to have the biggest advantage of all, and to best illustrate that advantage, here's a few cost per frame graphs. At 1080p, where the 6600 XT performs best relative to the RTX 3060, we see that in Australia, when looking at prices of models that are in stock and readily available, that the 6600 XT can be had for $730 Aussie, while the RTX 3060 costs $1,100, so a massive 51% premium for the GeForce GPU. That means in terms of cost per frame, the RTX 3060 is 61% more expensive than the 6600 XT. The difference is less extreme for US shoppers buying over at eBay, as the RTX 3060 is just 19% more expensive. Admittedly though, that is still quite a big margin, but it is less than what we're seeing locally here in Australia. Still, it does mean that the RTX 3060 is 27% more costly per frame, and that is obviously a very big difference. Even over at Newegg, the RTX 3060 will set you back 28% more per frame, and with the 6600 XT, you're actually getting a free MSI B550 Tomahawk motherboard, and that is an excellent quality motherboard, so it makes much more sense for US shoppers to snap up that deal rather than shop at eBay. Then if we look at the 6600 XT's less favourable 1440p data, we still find that for Australians, the RTX 3060 will cost you 54% more per frame, and for US shoppers using either eBay or Newegg, the RTX 3060 is still 22% more costly per frame. Basically, what this means is for US and Australian shoppers, the Radeon RX 6600 XT currently offers you significantly more value than the GeForce RTX 3060, and therefore should be the go-to option for all gamers looking for this level of performance. This situation is unlikely to change for Nvidia anytime soon, especially after the company came out and said that they expect supply issues of the RTX 3060 series to continue into September. So it's really unclear if the situation is going to improve before year's end. If I had to guess, I'd say that it won't. Of course, we will continue to monitor pricing with monthly updates, but for now at least, the RTX 3060 series looks to be a hard pass. And that is going to do it for this in-depth look at the battle between the Radeon RX 6600 XT and GeForce RTX 3060. If you like the video, you know what to do. You can also subscribe for more content. I will have a 6600 XT roundup looking at the various different models from Gigabyte, MSI, Sapphire, and so on. So if you're interested in buying a 6600 XT, then you're going to want to check out that content. Hopefully I'll have it on the channel next week. Also, if you'd like to support the channel directly, we have Floatplane Patreon. Links for those are in the video description. You'll get access to monthly live streams with Tim and myself, our awesome Discord server, great community over there, behind the scenes content, Q&As, a lot of cool stuff. So if you're interested, check it out. Links are in the video description. If not, that is perfectly fine. And I would like to just thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve, and I'll see you again next time.